Okay, good crowd. I want to just lay it out for you. This will be the most interesting episode we've ever produced. We have with us today Val Red-Horse Mohl. She's the executive director of Social Venture Circle and so much more. Block out the time to listen to every minute of this episode. You don't want to miss it.
Welcome to the Your Mark on the World show with your champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
Our sponsor, Johnson & Johnson, matches most individual donations up to $250 at caringcrowd.org. Val, welcome to the show.
Devin, thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're thrilled. We're just absolutely thrilled to have you. Social Venture Circle plays an incredible and important role in the social venture, social entrepreneurship, impact investing ecosystem. There's a lot of history there, but I wonder if you would just give us the short version of the history and describe the current role, vision, and mission for Social Venture Circle.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for having me on. You've set a pretty high bar by saying this is going to be the most interesting episode. And I sit here obviously representing a huge network of people that have gone before me, and I stand on their shoulders. So they will be interesting as part of my story. But exactly to your point, there was a merger last year in 2018 between Social Venture Network and Investor Circle, which created the new entity, Social Venture Circle. And that's what I am the executive director of. But I'm so proud to be able to look back at the long history. Social Venture Network was formed, actually the discussion started in the 70s, and then the luminaries that formed it, officially formed it in the 80s with the sole purpose of focusing on business leading with purpose. So profit and purpose, not philanthropy, but business as a force for good, which was a fairly new concept back then. And that was in the 80s. And then in the 90s, as they galvanized the business community, and some of those early founders are names you would recognize, like the founders of Ben & Jerry's and Seventh Generation and Eileen Fisher, and just a whole host of companies committed to earth and people. And basically, as they grew, they realized there was so much work to be done. Different factions in a very synergistic way spun out to create all these other nonprofits that still exist today, like B Lab, who does the B certifications, B Corp certifications, Net Impact, and Bally, and BSR, and Opportunity Collaboration. So we have this whole ecosystem of partners that have spun out of us. And Investor Circle was one of those that spun out in the 90s to focus on the facilitation of capital. So basically looking at early stage seed capital into impact businesses in support of those entrepreneurs. Fast forward to last year, they decided with all of the energy and motion that was starting to happen around ESG and impact investing and sustainability, there was so much more work to be done, even though they'd been at this for 40 years. They decided to merge back together to bring combined strengths and collaboration back into play, and they chose me. I'm very excited about that. Chose me to be their executive director and to look at what we're now going to do going into the future.
Well, you really are an incredible human being. Like you, I started a little investment banking firm 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And so I got a whole stack of FINRA licenses. Back in the day, it was NASD licenses.
Right.
I think you have the same stack with the addition of you did the municipal bonds license, which I
have did. The municipal. Yeah, I have 7.
But the big difference, I think I had 6 or 7 too. But the big difference between us is that you were successful in running your little investment. It's an incredibly difficult.
It's awful. Let's just be honest.
It really is incredibly difficult. You did $3 billion of transactions, and most of that was in the Native American community, or focused on that. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Absolutely. So the path to my becoming an investment banker, I truly felt was God-led, because I never plan to be an investment banker. And I'm glad that you and I are both recovered from that point. But basically, I was in college to be a filmmaker, and that is a big part of my life. I always wanted to be a filmmaker, but I was at UCLA and decided to get a day job just to bring in some extra spending money, actually, and went and interviewed for a company I knew nothing about. They said they were doing a new product on Wall Street called leverage finance high yield bonds. And it turned out I was interviewing with Mike Milken.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. That's amazing.
I laughed too, because here I am, a film major, and I had no idea what he was talking about, but I needed a job and I took the position. I think I was the second or third hire. He was bringing the group out from New York. This was 1978. And by the time I left in 1985 to have my first baby, I had basically an MBA in how to structure deals. We financed all of Las Vegas. Steve Wynn was my first personal client that I worked with. So I have lots and lots of stories. That'll be for another day. But bottom line, I realized that access to capital is a huge consideration for people of color and like my community. And this was actually before we had the implementation of the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. So it was before gaming. And then when gaming came into play in 1988, actually it was Senator Inouye who had a conversation with me at a tribal function, because I was just working sort of in motivational speaking with tribes and had a heart for my community. And he said, you have a responsibility. If you have expertise in finance, no community has really ever thrived without controlling their own finances. And right now, when the bonds started happening and the issuances for the gaming facilities, it was all being controlled by Wall Street bulge bracket firms, and the tribes were really being taken advantage of, so to speak. And so he really didn't just encourage me, he made it feel as if it was my responsibility to take that lead. And so that led me to talk to friends and family and investors on Wall Street, and one thing led to another, and it was by far the hardest thing I've ever done in the workplace, to raise the capital, start an investment bank on Wall Street, and try to survive and thrive in a very male-dominated and a sexist, racist environment, in all honesty.
Yeah, what a fascinating experience. We could talk all day just about that. But I want to talk about your filmmaking too, because last year you directed and produced a film called
Mankiller.
Mankiller, not to be confused with the film Mankillers, different movie altogether. Be careful when you Google. But tell us about Mankiller.
Absolutely, that's a joy. And I can't talk about the film Mankiller without mentioning my producing partner, who is a woman that I consider a mentor and just an amazing talent, Gillian Hurd, who, if any of you watch The Walking Dead, you know who she is as an executive producer. I personally love the Terminator series she produced and wrote. She's just an amazing producing partner, and she and I, 20 years ago, came together after I produced a small feature that went to Sundance, and she saw that. That was my first directorial debut. And she came to me and said she wanted to make a film about the Navajo Code Talkers. And she really is committed to impact in film in the sense of elevating women and people who have not been properly reviewed in the history books. And so she was really passionate about telling Native American stories, but knew she had to involve a Native American. So she pulled me on board as her producing partner and the director. And we went to make a feature about the Navajo Code Talkers, and they said, oh, no, we want a documentary. We want you to tell our real story. She and I had never made a documentary, but we kind of ran headfirst into it. PBS picked it up, funded it, and it turned out to be amazing. In fact, it got more attention and better reviews than the eventual film that MGM did with John Woo. And we screened it all over the world, really raised the level of awareness about what the Navajo Code Talkers did, and actually helped them with their medal, win their medal for legislation, had to be passed, and they use excerpts from our film. So that sort of impact in film really stuck with me. And, Gail continues to have a thriving career in the narrative space of, TV, fictional, both movies and series. And I gravitated to wanting just to do documentaries. I felt there was just such an important role in impact and the intersection of impact and film and telling our stories. And so we have made 3 films together, 3 documentaries. After that, we did the World War I story of the Choctaw Code Talkers. And then fast forward to 2010, we were asked to do Wilma Mankiller's life story, to what you were mentioning. And that was probably the greatest experience of my filmmaking career, just because I learned so much from Wilma. I mean, she died in 2010, and so we learned a lot about her and her life and her philosophies of servant leadership while we were making the film. It took us a long time. It came out in 2018, right in time to get invited to show it for Congress in a bipartisan screening, because part of her message is we need to all work together and not have partisan politics.
Wow, what a powerful legacy. Well, what a great experience. It just it's fascinating to think of you as a filmmaker and investment banker. But one of the things that intrigues me about you is that you said in the pre-show profile that you view the current economic system of capitalism as essentially unsustainable, and that we need to rework it to make it sustainable. An important concept, and I'd like you to talk about that. But the thing on your resume that strikes me as somehow in conflict with that idea is your Stanford education. I can't think of anything more capitalistic and establishment validating than Stanford, except perhaps maybe Harvard. But and that probably irritates you even more. So,
no,
but
there is nothing you can say that irritates me.
Tell me a little bit about how your Stanford experience frames or relates to the rest of your career. Fighting for Native American rights, telling stories, filmmaker, social good champion. Tell me how it all fits together.
Absolutely. And first of all, just to clarify, I have a degree from UCLA. My husband, who is very much a UCLA alum and supporter of everything Bruin, feels that I have gone completely over to the Stanford side of things. So I just want to clarify that I have my degree from UCLA. But I now teach at Stanford. I'm on the board of their Center for the Comparative Study of Race and Ethnicity. And I have two daughters, one that graduated in 2007 from Stanford and one that's currently a senior there and on their beach volleyball team. So I am a huge Cardinal fan. I'll be honest about that. But I think in response to your question, I have found Stanford's leadership very open to change and innovation, and I would not be on a board there if I didn't feel that I could make a difference. So if you think about the department I'm in, the comparative study of race and ethnicity, we look a lot at the poverty divide and the racial divide and where things need to change in terms of both women and minorities. And when I went in and started talking about potentially teaching the class that I teach, we looked at where entrepreneurial classes lie at Stanford, and most of them are either at the business school or in the tech area of like engineering. And I wanted to do neither. I said, I want to teach undergrads 18 to 21, and I want a racial lens and a social impact lens, a racial equity and social impact lens. And they said, great, how about Tuesday, Thursdays at 9? I was really prepared for like a year-long battle, and they gave it to me immediately to where I had to kind of adjust my schedule and go, whoa, okay, we're going to start. They told me I had to have 3 students sign up for the class in order to go forward with any class at Stanford. And so we had a small room reserved, and they contacted me and said, we have to move the room because you have 30 students that want to take this class. So I can't defend everything that Stanford has ever done. And they do lead the world in terms of universities that have produced entrepreneurs. And those entrepreneurs include people that run Silicon Valley companies. But to your point, most of those entrepreneurs are white male. And they're really trying to make an effort now to see those demographics change. So my class had 2 white males out of the 30, and everyone else, there was a really nice representation of different communities, LGBTQ community, as well as different ethnicities. We had some football players, and as well as some, master students from other departments. It was incredible. And we looked at social impact as a lead topic in business. And so I have to support Stanford's, at least their treatment of me and my educational pursuits in terms of my teaching. And I think anyone who's willing to change has to be given credit for that. We can't look at them. And I also think, I'm not suggesting that you're doing this, but I think there are stereotypes that we all buy into, and I'm very sensitive to that as a Native American. And I think you can point out certain mistakes and problems perhaps with Stanford historically, but honestly, if I look at my experience right now and where they're headed and what they're trying to do, and they're trying to listen to the world around them and make a difference, then I have to give them a thumbs up for that.
Excellent. You have spent much, maybe all of your career really, or almost all of it, working in and around and for the Native American community. And of course, you're a member of that community. You're a member of the Cherokee Nation, as I understand.
Just to clarify, I am not enrolled. I never could find my father's birth certificate, but I'm definitely Cherokee heritage and have tons of paperwork, and they've been very good to me and recognize me, but I am not officially enrolled as a voting member of the tribe.
Something interesting caught my attention, and to me it seemed so significant. Maybe it's not, and I'm wondering if you would just put this little tidbit of news in context for us. But I think it was just last week as we're recording this. This will air in a couple of weeks, so it'll seem a little out of sync. But last week, to you and me as we speak, the Cherokee Nation announced that they had sent to Congress notification that they had nominated their
Kimberly Teehee.
Yes, their representative to Congress, that they were given by treaty rights 200 years ago. Tell me about that. How do you feel about that? Is it significant? Is it just for show, or is there some substance there?
I couldn't be more thrilled. I think it is significant, and I applaud the Cherokee Nation for doing that. Even if it turns out to be more symbolic, history will show us that symbolism and symbolic moves like that are very bold, actually can have an effect that is significant. So we have to look at treaty rights. Treaty rights came about in the 1800s as this land grab and manifest destiny was happening, and the government was trying to find solutions and basically said, we're going to give you treaties because you tribes want to be able to have self-sufficiency and self-governance. We're going to recognize that. We're going to move you on to what we call reservations. And it wasn't always good for the tribes, let's be honest. But what we got that we wanted was sovereignty. And to any American Indian, sovereignty is key. And so sovereignty means self-governance. You get to govern your own lands, and it can be a double-edged sword because sometimes you don't have the resources to take care of all your people. And because you're sovereign, you don't get to share in like the tax base of the United States and the other states. And so it's a difficult concept, but one that we have fought long and hard for. Most of the treaties have been broken. We won't go into all that negative history, but honestly, it's been a sad history. But in a synergistic, or I should say analogistic fashion, if we look back to something that happened here in the Bay Area in 1969 with the takeover of Alcatraz as a protest, for all intents and purposes, that was symbolic because they found a treaty right that said any unused federal land had to go back to the native tribe that was indigenous to that area. And so when Alcatraz became unused, the Indian population of the Bay Area properly said, if we cite this treaty right from, 1800 and something, we should be able to take over Alcatraz. Well, of course, the federal government didn't just lie down and say, yes, you can have Alcatraz, but it was a long, drawn out protest. It brought celebrities out. It's featured in my film Mankiller because she was a part of it. But what happened, Devin, that was so significant, no, they didn't get the island of Alcatraz and they got kicked off. But under the Nixon administration, which is, I sort of would have missed that on Jeopardy, Nixon took that into consideration and ended up sort of reworking certain treaty rights and land rights and sovereignty rights and the reaffirmation of certain tribes. And actually more positive change happened under the Nixon administration than almost any other administration. So when we take that example, I think this appointment of Kimberly, who I love and admire very, very much, It's symbolic, but it's significant because we need to have a voice at the table. And I think for too long, our American Indian tribal voices have been silenced. And there is wisdom there that we need to help repair this country and this planet. And I think it's fantastic.
It isn't clear to me whether the treaty anticipated a voting member of Congress or essentially an observer. Which do you expect it to be? And B, do you expect Congress to seat them in either capacity as the treaty would have required?
I think it'll be a slow process. I don't know that she'll be given voting rights immediately. I think that would probably take some sort of legislative action. I'm not an expert on the exact interpretation of the treaty. I will tell you that my experience in working with the federal government over the last 25 to 30 years when I've worked with tribes on different mandates, it's painful because it's such a lengthy process. It's a bureaucratic process. I was actually offered a position to consider under the Obama administration of special trustee for the BIA. And after reviewing it and realizing how little gets done in the government system, regardless of who's in office and regardless of what party is in place, I decided to stay in the private sector. And that might relate back to your earlier question about capitalism. But I did realize that as much as we need to work with the government, and there needs to be private and public partnerships, I felt I would be more effective in the private sector because things just happen very slowly. Change is slow, it's hard. Everyone working there really has good intentions, but I hope that Kimberly gets to have an effective role. My guess is it'll take some time to make those changes.
Val, as you look back over your extraordinary career, what are you most proud of having accomplished?
You know what, Devin? That's an easy question, and I think you're asking me probably more about business, but I'm the most proud of my role as a mother, and that really led to where I sit now at SVC, because as a mother, things that are happening around us concern me, and I have, together with my husband of nearly 40 years, have nurtured 3 amazing, beautiful children who are now adults. My youngest is 21, so she's sort of a new adult, but mm-hmm. They grew up and left the nest. And I'm concerned about their world and what the world and the planet will look like for them and their children. And I couldn't kind of sit and do things in the same manner that I was and needed to make this change, and went from a for-profit life into working in the nonprofit space. And I'm happy that I did that and will stay here hopefully for as long as they will have me. But I really am proud of my children and have a deep, deep love as a mother, and feel that that's what's driving me now.
That's amazing. Appreciate that, you sharing that. But Valerie, what is your superpower?
I love that question because I come from a background that almost feels counterintuitive to the SVC culture, in the sense that it's not something that's talked about a lot at SVC, and that is my sports background. I myself am not an amazing athlete at all, but my husband played NFL football, and consequently all 3 of our children fortunately inherited his genetics, and they all played sports at a fairly high level. And I think you know that my daughter at Stanford now plays beach volleyball. If you talk to me for any more than 5 minutes, you will know that, because everyone in my office is a little sick of hearing about beach volleyball. But what I've learned over the years as the quintessential team mom, and I've also been a little bit of a coach here and there, and just a cheerleader, a huge fan. And I'm talking like painting myself in the colors and having earrings and clothing and all of that. I've learned that there are some really important lessons from athletics that we need to apply in our lives and in the world and in business. And that really is around teamwork and collaboration and kind of working together with our strengths. And I often use my husband when he's in an audience with me for my example. He is a former offensive lineman for the Oakland Raiders. He is 6'6" and 300 pounds, although he says he's now 280. So I'll give him that, he's about 280. But regardless, for those of us that don't weigh anywhere near that. It's big. And and I say, you as a coach or a team personnel director, you would never put my husband as a running back. He is an offensive lineman. That's his strength. That's what he's built for. And I think my superpower in the role that I sit in is to be able to really pull together our team, to be able to empower them for what their strengths are. And also not just within SVC, but looking at the ecosystem. We have so many wonderful partners out there that we're all kind of doing the same work. We have the same goals and the same passions. And I have started initiatives where we're working together towards common goals. And I think that's what we need to do. So I'm a collaborator and I'm a team mom.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Val, this discussion did not disappoint. This has been fantastically interesting, and I wish we could talk for 6 more hours, but I really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Before you go, would you just take a minute and tell people how they can learn more about Social Venture Circle and how they can connect with you personally?
Absolutely, and I would love that. Our website is svcimpact.org, and I would invite you to visit it. We have a lot going on and a lot of activities all over the globe. And then to reach me, the best possible way is to email my assistant who is on top of everything. I currently have about 4,000 emails that I don't get to in my inbox. So that would be Elizabeth@svcimpact.org.
Fantastic. Well, again, Val, thank you very much for being with us, and we wish you every success in all the great work that you're doing.
Well, same to you, Devin. I am so sorry to hear that you will shortly be winding down your show, but you've been fantastic as a supporter of Impact, and I just want to thank you for what you've done, and thank you for having me on today. It's been a real honor.
Thank you, Val. Now let's do some good.
At Caring Crowd, we believe everyone has the power to make a difference. Through our crowdfunding platform for community health, we empower passionate people to drive real change. Whether you work for a nonprofit organization, volunteer, or want to get involved for the first time, you can post a campaign on Caring Crowd. Join us, because caring is where change begins.
Thanks for tuning in to the Your Mark on the World show, the Social Impact Podcast. Please subscribe via YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or Spotify.